lazy routes. How do we define the lazy routes and how do we configure the lazy routes, right? So we are going to understand about another concept here is lazy. So we will see this works. So the concept of lazy loading works. So lazy already, so we discussed about this lazy loading, and here we are learning lazy loading of routes. So how lazy loading of routes work? Yeah. So lazy loading, once I explained when we discussed about virtual scrolling, I showed you how we can load only the content that we need for that particular situation. Now, so there are two important options. So we have eager loading and lazy loading. So all Angular modules are eagerly loaded actually. By default, all Angular modules, that means ng modules that are defined in application. So all Angular modules of application, all Angular modules of application are actually eagerly loaded. They are eagerly loaded. So that means modules are loaded along with application, are loaded with application, along with application. So usually it makes application heavy on browser. It makes application very heavy on browser. So and also it makes page rendering slow. Page rendering slow. It also makes the page rendering slow. So even when you are not using any specific module, it is loaded into memory actually. So technically, even when you are not using any specific module, so it is loaded into memory. So what is the concept of lazy loading is nothing but lazy loading is a design pattern, technically it is a software design pattern, and allows to ng modules load ng modules only when they are required, only when they are required. That is important. So what is the advantage of this is it keeps initial bundle size smaller. It keeps the initial bundle size smaller. It improves it actually improves the render time. So it decreases the page load time. And another option is it is more lightweight on browser. It decreases the page load time. It is more lightweight on browser, and it can reach broad range of devices. So devices, that means from mobile to browser everywhere it can reach. These are all the advantages of using lazy loading, implementing the concept of lazy loading. So usually the key thing you need to understand is about how we can reduce the burden and how we can improve the page load time. So by keeping the size of bundles compact. This you will see practically also how it is used. That means the modules are loaded only when it is required. Let's create another application for this. Let's create and see another application how to deal with that. How do we work and deal with that? Let's take a look about application here. Actually, when we are working with our current application, so let's design a new application for us. So let's close all this. Okay. Already we have two projects. Let's create one more project for our solution. Okay, for this, inside this workspace, I'm generating another application, ng generate application. So we can generate an application. So application name, application is some shopping. Okay, shopping is an application. And in this shopping application, hyphen routing, I'm adding this routing by default now. So that means this will create an application by default enabled with routing. Usually it will ask us, do you want to add routing module and all? By using the command hyphen routing, you are creating an application enabled with routing. Enabled with routing. So generally I select that and so now it is generating a new application enabled with routing and its name is some shopping. Okay. Now in this application, it is just asking CSS, which CSS you want. So, and we are adding it. Now a new project is created in our workspace called shopping. So we need to maintain. That means at high level, we will create modules. We can configure the modules. Internally, every module can have a navigation. That means actually, suppose, so we have an application, some banking application. So suppose we have a bank application, so bank application. And in this bank application, usually technically, this is the bank application. And in this bank application, we have some modules, right? Like we have retail banking. So, and we have like corporate banking like this. And again, in this, that means these are two subdomains actually under this bank. And under retail banking, there will be other, again, retail banking have a different screen. So it will have a login, it will have a register. So register, it will have services, it will have customers. So like this, so we have a lot of other things inside that. And corporate banking is again, so which contains again, it contains a login, it contains a register, it contains corporate services like this. Corporate services. So many things will be there. Now the point is, this is all in one application. This is all in one application. We are managing both. In one application, we are managing both technically. So that means here the point is, so these are the two subdomains under the main domain, and every domain has its own route. So that means usually, you know, every module has some more concepts inside it. We have retail, we have corporate. Inside that again, login services, customers, different. Uh, if you want to create such type of environment for your application, that's what we want to create the environment for our application. Then this time we will not add directly components. Actually, these are all components only. These are all components only. Then what we do is we maintain all these components under a retail module. Under the retail module, we have these components. Under the corporate module, you have these components. Under the corporate module, you have these components. That means the components are defined in this. So in retail module, we have retail components, and corporate, we have corporate components. We have this approach now. So the key important point you need to understand there is, so now all the components are kept in a module. Now, when user selects corporate, only corporate module should load. So it should not load the retail module. That means we need only that particular components related to the module that are necessary for that situation. So we can maintain such environment by adding modules, So for every module, we can have a routing. That means retail module will have a routing, and corporate module will have a routing. And important is these are child routes, and bank application will have a routing. It is the parent. That means these are the parent routes and child routes. A nested combination will be there. So a combination of several routes will be there. Now here important is how we handle this kind of environment. This is what generally at high level applications look like actually. Then for that, what we are doing now is let's open this shopping app folder. Let's open this shopping app folder. And this time, don't generate the components directly. You don't generate the components directly. So create the modules here. This time, how we are creating the modules, how we are configuring the modules. So ng generate module. This is one module. And the module ng generate module and module name. Module name is vendors. Vendors is the module. And do you want routing for this vendors module? Then we will keep hyphen routing, route, hyphen route. That enables routing for this module again. That means it will add a routing module inside this module. Every module can have collection of components, and every module can have a set of routes defined. And this vendors module should be registered in the app module. So this vendors module should be registered in the app module. So that means actually, so at high level hierarchy, suppose I'm creating an application. This is our shopping application. In this shopping application, we have actually app.module.ts. So that is the root file that we generally know. We have app.module.ts, that is the application module configuration file. Okay. Now important is in this shopping application, so we have app.module.ts along with that. Usually we have two other modules generated here. So we are generating two other modules. One module is our customers module, and we have another module like vendors module. So we have vendors module, we have customers and vendors module, something like this. Now this is a module, this is module. And important is every module usually it comprises, our entire application has a routing module, right? So that means here I will keep in a clear, simple way that this shopping application is directly having two things. One is app routing dot module dot ts. Another one here it is having app module dot ts. Now what you need to know here is actually every component, so every module again comprises of a routing module. Every module comprises of a routing module. So vendors and customers contain a routing module. And every module can contain a collection of components. It can have a collection of components. Like we have a home component here. So we have a login component here, like that. Just roughly I'm defining, you can add any number here. That means home, so say register or login, something. That means every module, actually every routing inside, every module inside it actually comprises of some more components inside them. So this is the actual hierarchy. This is the actual hierarchy. This is how you can manage your application now. That means, so we need to create a module, and this module, remember this customers module and vendors module. These two customers and vendors module, usually it needs to be registered in the app module. It needs to be registered in the app module. That means in the app module, we have to register that. These need to be registered in the app module. So then they are present in the main navigation, and inside them, there can be other navigation. So that means home and login are registered in the routing module of these components. So now we need to create a module, and this module should have its own routing. And this module usually should maintain, so its registry in the main module. It should maintain the registry in the main module. That is important here. It should maintain in the main module. Then what usually we do is here, how do we configure is, so when we generate a component, so ng generate module vendors, enable routing for that module. And now what we need to do is, we need to register this module into app module.ts. Then we have to use, so after configuring the routing, so we have to define. That means it is having the module generated by name vendors enabled with route. Then vendors should be, so vendors module should be registered. So hyphen module, it should be registered into app.module, into app module. That means this vendors, first we created a module by name vendors. After that, this vendors module, we are adding into the registry of modules of app module. App module have a modules collection. Into the modules collection, we are adding it. So we can manually add it. So in one attempt, you can do it. So we can create a module by name vendors and add routing, then add this vendors module into app module. So then hit enter, then it will generate a module for us. Similarly, add, it is done. So it created and it generated everything for us. Okay. By default, vendors module have a component called vendor component. Remember, every module have its own routing module and module.ts. App module is globally. We are just discussing about routing module, and one more here, better to give you to keep it more clean here. Actually, every component, every module is having its own module registrations again. That means we have customers, so .module.ts, customers.module.ts. They have their own module, customers module.ts, because all customers components can have a customers module. So where all the customer related modules are registered. Similarly, here we are having like vendors. We have vendors.module.ts. So that means the main application have a module registration. The child modules will have it. That means you can simply think that every module is working like every module is technically working like it is working like a application, a domain inside another domain, an application inside another application, which can have collection of several components and configure with collection of several components. Now you can see here, so generally, once you define this, so let's add one more component here. So ng generate module. So this is customers, ng customers hyphen route, and customers hyphen module app.module. So this is how we are generating the modules. We are configuring the modules. So this is how we configured the modules. Now you can observe in your project, once you've done this, you can see in the project shopping app folder. In the shopping app folder, you can see that customers and vendors separate folders are maintained. These are not components. And your main application is having a routing. The main application is having a routing. Routing.module.ts. The main application is having a routing. And every module, customers and vendors, these two are modules. We generated these two modules. I will give level by level clean screenshots also for you to make understand about that. So let's see here. First point. So that means an example for this is first point. So we need to generate. So create a new project, a new application. Create a new application, and we are doing that. So ng generate application, and we have shopping. And here, when we are generating the application, we can mention about the routing how you want. That means hyphen routing. Okay. So that means it will add the routing module for you. Now open, so shopping app folder, shopping app folder in integrated terminal. Okay, and then what you have to do is generate the following modules. We have to generate some modules inside them. And what are the modules we need to generate actually? So we need to generate the modules. And for that, we are using the command that is ng generate module. One is vendors and hyphen route. Then vendors hyphen module and app.module. Register it. And similarly, we need to create ng generate module, customers, so route, and vendors and module. So module and app. Yeah. So you have to register that, right? Module. Okay. And in app.module, in app module, you have to define. Okay. These two modules are generated. These two modules are generated. After generating the modules, that means what you will see in the screen here is how they appear actually. These two modules are generated. Every module comprises of their own appearance. Let's take a look about that. So here, yeah. So this is the screenshot I will give. These two modules are generated, snip. Okay. Just for clear understanding, I'm taking the screenshot here. So this is the shopping and these are the modules. So these are the modules designed. These are the modules created for us in that particular folder. That means customers and vendors. That is the first option. Okay. Now important in this, one more thing you should know is this generates the following modules here. Okay. Now here, every module, customers and vendors, you can observe every module actually. By default, it implements lazy routes, configures the lazy routes, especially when you add this type of module mechanism. So earlier versions in Angular 7, Angular 6 and Angular other versions, Angular 8 also, we have to manually enable the routes, means lazy routes. But here the routes are automatically configured. When you add any component, actually you can see that every component in the customers, you can see every component has its own routing and every component, it has its own module. And by default, a component is present. Every module have this. Every module that is generated, it contains its own routing module. And this routing will work only for this customer's module. In that, again, so many components may be there. In customers, again, you can maintain several components inside them. And it can have its own customer module.ts where you can register its own materials, its own forms. So that means it simply works like an application again. It simply works like an application. So that is how it is configured actually. That means every component comprises of these files. Every component that we generated, that means every module comprises of following files. Every module comprises of following files. And these are all the files for the modules. That means every module have these files. Let's copy that. So this is customers and it is having all these files. Every module have these files, just for again understanding here like this. Every module have its own files. So it has all these files. And the purpose, no need to explain. Already we know that. That means customers routing contains the child routes of this module. That means remember one simple point here is every module acts as an application, acts as an application within the root application. Every module acts as an application within the root application. It has its own routing, it has its own module configuration, and everything is defined here. Now you can observe and see here how it is configured and defined. You can observe and see. This is a lazy route configured and defined. Now what we need to do is observe carefully in the routing of these components. So here go to customers routing module.ts. You can see customer routing.module.ts. This time you can see it is for child. It is loading these routes for child. And by default, there is a path for customers component. Now in the customers module, you can add any number of components now. And those all components have their navigation from one location to another location. They can have their own navigation. So they can have the navigation. So technically now important is you can see it is defined. So it is configured. You can see it is configured and defined here. Now when I go to generally, when we go to the main routing, this is for child. Why? Because it is for only this module. And observe here, so like customers, vendors also same. And main routing module.ts is there, app routing module.ts. In app routing module.ts, here you will see one interesting option. So we have the path for vendors. It will get, so vendors, and observe carefully, vendors have to load vendors module. But vendors module should load only when vendors is requested. If I by default mention a module name here, it will loads the module automatically at the time of loading the application. But observe carefully, this time you have an syntax here, load children. That means whenever you request, this load children is used for loading. This is for loading child routes, lazy loaded child routes. So that means in interviews, if anyone asks how to configure lazy routes, so in routing, lazy routes are configured in the routing by using the property load children. Load children will load. This is a function actually. This function, this is an returning, right? What it is returning? It is importing. It is importing the vendor's module. After importing the vendor's module, then it is returning that vendor's module. This indicates that it is returning the vendor's module. Load children will do two things. Will first import the module and it will render that module. It will return that module. Similarly, customers will import the customer's module and then load the customer's module. This syntax you can maintain. Actually, we can write it manually, but if you generate it through commands, everything is created for you. So that means if you want to implement lazy routing, so lazy routes, then you have to configure this. You have to configure this. So initially, first point is here. Every module acts as, right? Every module actually, so let's keep a point here. Every module, so every module comprises of routes loaded into child, loaded, or you can say loaded for child. That is better, loaded for child. Every module comprises of routes loaded for child. Syntactically, so if you go to customers dot routing, customers-routing dot module dot ts. If you go to this file, you will see that the routing is defined inside this. The routing is defined inside this, and that routing will be in this way. So I will go to customers routing module, and inside that routing will be defined in this way. Just syntactically, I'm giving that here. Actually, that is auto-generated for us. And you can see this is the route, and this is for the customer's component and router module for child, not for root. The main routing module will have for root. The same thing. So it will happen for every module. The same thing is configured for every module. We are configuring the same option for every module, right? That is defined, that is accessed, and that is defined here. Now the same approach we need to follow here. The same approach we need to follow and define. And what is the approach we need to follow and design here? So let's see that. So that means what's the option here? That means let's go into the app module, app routing module. Here the lazy routes are defined. So that is an important point to note, that I will give a note here. So the point is the lazy routes for modules are configured by using load children by using load children function in the route configuration, So the lazy routes for modules are configured by using load children in the route configuration. That is the important one. It is configured by using that load children. That path you have seen. So how it works, actually the path you have seen. So that means how it is defined and handled, the path you can see that. Usually, so how the path works generally. So let's go to the app routing module.ts. You can see in the routes collection, we have a path. Load children is actually a function. So this generally imports the module and then renders that module and returns the module, imports the module and loads the module. Two things it will do. So that means, so usually syntactically, how the lazy routes are defined means syntactically how they are configured. So we have to use this syntax. So load children. I will just define here path. So this is module name. Module name is the path. And here we are configuring. So load children, we are defining that. So how you add that load children? So let's see. So we are defining that load children in this way, right? So load children. And the load children is actually a function. Actually, it is a function. That means generally we write a function as a callback function with return. But this is to configure it as a function, then we use a basic syntax here. So then we use a basic syntax here. This is, so load children function. Here what we need to write the configuration is the first configuration for import the module. Then we have to use then load the module. That is the basic syntax we have to define. We need to first import the module and then load the module. For that, syntactically, how the option is used, how the option is configured, and how the option is used. So syntactically, how it happens. So that means syntactically you write like this. That means you have to define in this way. So we need to configure and define in this way. That means let's go to the path. I will copy that syntactically load children. I will just copy this path and I will give the code what is defined here. So app routing module.ts. App routing module.ts. Yeah. In this, so you can observe the basic example. That means all the configuration, it will be defined in this. So we are importing here. So we are importing and we are configuring the routes. And this is how it is loading the route. Let's keep it clean. So this is one path. This is another path. And this is where the route collection is defined. Actually, if it is not defined, then we have to manually write. So manually write. But once you add through commands, it is already defined. So it's very simple to handle now. So this is done. Just what we need to do extra work now. That means if it is not written, we have to write it. So we have to write load children. Load children, we have to import that particular module and then load that module. What is the concept of this load children? It will load only when it is requested. It will load only when it is requested. It will not keep it loaded by default actually, right? So that is ready. Now we need to just put a navigation here. Navigation, you know how to design that. So suppose I will go to, because the startup one in our application will be app component.html. In the app component.html, so we will add, yeah. What are the options? I will just keep a heading. I will just keep a heading here, some Amazon shopping, and here we will just use a div and we will configure a div. And I haven't linked any bootstrap or that here, just roughly I will give home and another button. So we define as some categories. So another button, so we defined, so dot as vendors, just button we are configuring. And below this, we will keep another div. And this div, so just style, I'm just giving margin top as some 50 pixels. And here I will keep the router outlet. We'll keep the router outlet. And now important, on this button click, it has to navigate to those modules. So generally to navigate to the modules, so for button click, so we have the options here. So home, that means it will use a router link here, router link, and router link is empty. That means it will take us to the home. And the router link, so we defined here, is equal to / categories. It will take us to the categories. So that means in the routing module, we have not categories, customer, right? Yeah, customer and vendors we have. So here we will define vendors. So this is customers, okay, customers. Then here we will define the path name as customer, okay. And this is vendors. So that means we have a router link and is equal to / this is vendors. This is vendors. That is the path name we are configuring. So you can keep it for these options for the link or any specification that you define. Now let's run this and see. That means we have a complex application architecture now. In this complex application architecture, we are maintaining modules. Inside those modules, again, components. Every module can have a navigation inside it. You can try that. Now you can try creating some components inside those modules. And for every module, write an routing. And all are together handled here. So that means now when I run this, so let's run in the terminal. Generate ng server project is equal to shopping. Okay. Now the shopping app contains the main modules and we can change the data here. That means in the customers module, you can go to customers in the customers module. This customers component is in the startup. And here I defined a heading. So this is customers home. So, and in the vendors component, so that is vendors HTML is the startup one. We will not have index in every module. The default component is the startup. So that means here we kept a heading here as this is vendors home, like this. So this is how generally we can handle the lazy routes, configure and use the lazy routes. Okay, once it is compiled successfully, let's check that. Now, initially, what the modules you will observe here. So how it is handling and defining it. So open here. Okay. Now you can see that we have home, customers, vendors like options defined here. And important is you can define whatever you want in the startup. You can configure anything you want in the startup. By default, you want to keep some home component, add a home component and keep in the startup. So depending on your requirement, what you want to configure, you can add it, right? So initially you can observe, go to inspect. And in the inspect, so open this application. Okay. So this is just content. Go to network here. Okay. Go to network. In the network, so usually when I am requesting this, so you can see the request came here. And observe in the requests here, you can see in the requests made here. So currently some contents are loaded. Some contents are loaded here. You can see some contents are loaded. And I explained in the beginning about these options, what they are. That means runtime, polyfills, styles, vendors, main, only these are loaded. Now customers related bundle is not loaded. Vendors related bundle is not loaded. This vendor JS is not vendors. Actually, this is to startup. So later I will explain this files scenario, one example at the end, right? Now click on customers. When I click on customers, actually that customer's home comes here. Customer's home comes here. And when I click on vendors, so that means the vendor's home comes here. Vendor's homes comes here. That means it is accessing those details and we are displaying those details. We can track the performance here. That means we can stop recording the network log and start recording the network log. It will start the network activities actually. So this is the request. And observe carefully. I am requesting from the first one more time. Observe carefully. Currently, we have only these files. So currently we have only these files. And when I click on customers button, the customers module, that bundle is loaded. You see customers bundle is loaded. This is not loaded until or unless I requested it. So earlier it will load this bundle, all the module bundles are loaded. Earlier all the module bundles are loaded. But now the bundle is loaded only when it is required. We are not disposing it actually. We are not disposing it. We are keeping that customers module loaded and we are selecting vendors. Actually, don't think that this is gone. This is there and we are accessing vendors also. Then you can see that now the vendors will be loaded. That module is requested. So if this module is not in use, it will be disposed. So in the background, it will be disposed. So we can destroy. I will tell you. So generally, now what happens here is these two modules are loaded only on request. They are not by default loaded. So by default, they are not loaded. When I am requesting an application, when I request an application, and you can see those modules related library not there. The library for those modules is loaded only when we need for that. That means when I click on customers, then customers module will come. And when I click on vendors, the vendors module will come. This improves the application. This improves the application performance. That means, so only the content that is needed for the situation will be loaded for you. So this you can implement in general routes. This you can implement anywhere. So while configuring the routes. So you can directly use this technique for dealing with that. Loading a component or loading a module, that depends on how your environment is configured with. How your environment is configured with. That means actually, so this is the basic syntax, This is lazy loading of the modules. For example, sometimes in interviews, they will ask like, okay, how you can lazy load the components? How you can lazy load the components? Actually, the components also can lazy load. That means in our previous example, if you look at the previous example, routing module.ts, here all the components are loaded immediately, means they are loaded automatically at the time of loading the application. Now electronics component should be loaded only when it is required. In that case, we can use an option load children. Load children is a function, and this function is expecting the functionality to return. What is the functionality to return? So we need to configure the functionality in this syntax. That means what it has to do is it should import that component related library and then load that component related library. That means what we have to do is we have to use import. We have to import. And this import, so should import the component related library. Here we are importing module related library. That means here we have to import the component related library. Like dot slash. So which component related library? Electronics. In electronics, we have electronics component related library. We have to import that electronics component related library. Then we have to use dot then. Then we have to load that library. And return that library. That means this component should return that electronics component class. It should return that electronics component class. This is how you generally configure the routes. So that means lazy route can be defined. So that means now what will happen is this component, so class will be loaded only when this is requested. Otherwise, actually what happening is all these components are loaded and they are rendered to you. Why you are loading all the components? Load only the component that is necessary for you. I showed you a higher hierarchy, but this is how we generate the module configurations. That means this is how we create the component loading as lazy loading. This is simple. That means we have to just add load children. I showed you a separate example with a high level module interface. So modules in that components, but in general, our routing example also we can implement that. So what is this is implementing lazy routes. It is implementing lazy routes. By default, so when you add the routes through module technique, it will implement lazy routes only. From Angular 8 and 9 and 10 version onwards, by default, they use lazy routes. Other versions, we need to explicitly write the routes for lazy. So that is the difference actually. That means you can configure the component also. However, first, so after defining this, what we need to do, example is, after defining this, then we have to go to so app.component.html. In the app component HTML, we need to add this logic actually. So app component HTML, this we need to define. And you can test that. So you can test this in your browser by turning the network on. You can see how it is loading only the module that is required. So here, one more option is you can implement this lazy, you can implement lazy loading for components, lazy loading for components. So by configuring the following, by configuring lazy route. So how you can configure the lazy route? So this is the line that I showed you. This we can do with our existing example. That means now the component related library is loaded only when it is requested. We can do in this way. I loaded a module related one. You can load a component related one, and we can configure that. So that is the basic of how we can implement lazy loading in the routes. Lazy loading in the data I showed you. I showed you about a component called virtual scroll. There I showed you how to load the data lazy. So this is lazy routes loading. So we learned two important options, right? How to deal with that. Right? Next important, after knowing this, now we need to learn about another concept here is how we can handle and interact with the services. That means we need to learn about the concept of RxJS. We need to learn about the integration with the mean stack. Mean stack means how to communicate with server-side technology, services, APIs, and access the data from database and interact in our application. That we will see in our next session, right? Tomorrow we will continue with that. That will be a big example. It will have an end-to-end integration now. That means we will build an application with the database and server-side technology, how to integrate and access and use in our Angular application. That will be the final end-to-end example for us to learn about front-end to back-end database, everything, how communication actually works. For that, we need some basics of database and server-side middlewares, which I will give a simple overview. That will be enough for handling and creating end-to-end. If you already know Java, .NET, PHP, you can use those technologies in the background. So, and we can handle Angular in the foreground for handling interaction with the APIs and services. That we are going to learn in the next session. Tomorrow, we will continue with that. Okay, right.